I'm Professor Awesome, PhD. Let's see what we have in the Unlocked Word Hoard mailbag today. Today's letter comes from Lex Fajardo. He's the artist who produces the Kid Beowulf graphic novel series about Beowulf and his adventures through various works of ancient and medieval literature. And Lex writes to us, I was having a discussion with a friend today about whether or not Beowulf was a Christian epic and realized that I really wasn't sure if it was. Aside from the fact that a monk transcribed it and threw in a few Christian elements here and there, I've never considered it to be one, certainly not in the way Roland or Alcides. Can you direct me to some good articles, thoughts, or essays that talk about this? What's your take on it? Well, Lex, in The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien says, go not to the elves for counsel, for they will say both yes and no. And in fact, my answer to you today is both yes and no. Or rather, what I'm going to suggest is that we take a distinction between Beowulf the story and Beowulf the poem. Now, Beowulf the story is undoubtedly a very old story. For example, we know that there is this character of King Hrothgar in it. And Hrothgar was a real guy who lived at the end of the 5th century, beginning of the 6th century. And so we know that at least some part of the tale must have had its origins in his reign. And in fact, some parts of the story might even be many centuries older than that, particularly when we're getting into folkloric elements, like stories about other sorts of heroes that maybe are analogous to Beowulf or similar to Beowulf. However, we don't have those old stories. We know they must have existed. We know that Beowulf as a story must have been passed on and picked up maybe other elements as it went along the way for many, many centuries. But what we have today is a single poem in Old English in a single manuscript. And that manuscript was written was transcribed, that is, or written down in the beginning of the 11th century, just after 1100 AD. And so the question then becomes, well, at what point does Beowulf pick up its Christian elements? Because it has very obvious Christian elements, and as Lex pointed out, there are some that appear to maybe be plugged into there by later transcribers. But some scholars think that maybe one of the scribes of the actual manuscript we have is the poet who wrote it. Other scholars think that we're looking at a poem that might have existed for many centuries beforehand, into the 8th century, or perhaps early. In either case, we're still looking at a time frame for the poem to have been written in Old English, in the form that we understand it. That would have happened about during the time when England, the Anglo-Saxons, had already become Christianized, or were well into the process of being Christianized. And so it seems to me that the Beowulf poet has an understanding of this and very clearly alludes to not just his own Christian beliefs, but the Christian beliefs of his audience, and trying to figure out how do we think about Beowulf, who's this pagan hero. And so the result is, I would say, we end up with a poem that is a Christian poem, but a story that is a pre-Christian story, that then is being told through the centuries by Christians to Christians. Now, if you're interested in knowing more about this, the best starting place is an essay called The Christian Coloring of Beowulf by F.A. Blackburn, and mine is from an anthology of Beowulf criticism edited by Lewis E. Nicholson. And this is about 115 years old, I think, at this point, this essay is. And he we get the starting point of this argument. And he argues, very similarly to what Lex has said, that Beowulf is essentially a pre-Christian, or as he would say, a heathen story that gets a few Christian elements tacked on. If you want to know more about the historical elements, one good place to go is Francis Klaber's edition of Beowulf, which is written in Old English. This is the third edition, and he has a really nice introduction in there, and this is pretty easy to find. And then also Mitchell and Robinson's edition of Beowulf. It has a very short, but I think nice discussion of the manuscript and some of the other historical elements surrounding the poem, so you can make up your own mind about which parts of it maybe come from before Christianity, which parts are part of Christianity, which parts have Christianity really sort of firmly meshed in there, and which parts the Christianity is just sort of tagged on at the end. I'd like to hear more about what you think about this and other topics, so if you have questions, write to me and I'll be happy to answer them. Also, visit our Facebook page or the Unlocked Word Hoard blog and give us your comments. Unlock your word hoard.